AP Psychology, Day 2. Today we do operant conditioning. So if you go back to the main page, go to Learning, and we'll be working off the handout, and we're going to do the operant conditioning types worksheet. When we get back after the quiz and the test and all that, we'll do the schedules and a few other things, clean it up. But for now, we do just explain operant conditioning. Whereas classical conditioning is where you pair two things together, like in this case from classical conditioning, you pair food with a bell, and then the dog learns to associate the bell with the food. That's classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is just shaping behavior or increasing or decreasing the frequency of the behavior using rewards or punishment. So you reward something, you get more of the behavior. You punish something, you get less of the behavior. It really is that simple. For classical conditioning, we had Pavlov and the dog, bell, salivation. For operant conditioning, we still have animals. We have this guy, B.F. Skinner, and he used pigeons and rats in cages, basically. He put hungry pigeons or hungry rats in a cage, and then he gave them a, you can see that right there, that little lever that the rat can press. He gave them a button they could press, and it got more complicated than this, but at the most simple, he gave them a button they could press, they pressed the button, and then they got rewarded with food, which he called positive reinforcement. To explain operant conditioning, you can explain it pretty well on a grid like this. There are four possibilities. There's positive, negative, reinforcement, and punishment, which means that you can have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Negative reinforcement sounds a little silly, and positive punishment sounds a little silly. They're not what they sound like. You'd think positive means good, negative means bad, because that's how we usually use it. Positive does not mean good. All positive means is adding something. And negative means removing something. Does not mean good and bad. Reinforcement simply means it's going to increase the frequency of behavior, or it's rewarding. And punishment, of course, means it's a punishment, or you don't want it to happen, and it will result in the behavior decreasing. So it's pretty easy to think about these things in terms of dogs, because most of you have dogs. And think about something you could add to a dog that would reward the dog. And just think that to yourself. One of the things you could do is give it a treat. That would be positive reinforcement, because you're giving the treat when it does something you want it to do more often, and that rewards the dog, increasing the frequency of whatever it is that dog did. You can also say, good boy, or girl, or whatever. Any kind of adding a positive thing would be positive reinforcement. That one everyone understands. Everyone knows what positive reinforcement is. It's the other ones that get a little bit more dicey. There's an episode of Big Bang Theory where they actually get this wrong, which, if you remind me, I will show you in class. I can't show here, unfortunately, because of copyright stuff. But I'll show you in class where Sheldon, the big science nerd, supposedly gets this completely wrong. He uses, what does he use? He uses one of these grids incorrectly. And in fact, we'll show it, and I'll see if you can guess what he's doing wrong. But he incorrectly uses this. In fact, they then became aware of it after airing the episode. And a few seasons later, they aired another episode where Sheldon corrects his mistake, although they don't call it his mistake. But he explains the incorrect usage that he previously used. They also get it wrong in Ghostbusters and a few other things. People use it wrong all the time. Positive punishment is the other easy one to understand. So positive punishment would be adding something to punish behavior. So adding something that the dog doesn't want to decrease the frequency of the behavior. So the dog jumps on the counter, and what can you do to your dog? You could spray your dog with water. You could say, bad dog. That would work as positive punishment because it's adding. You could, I'm going to put this in red because you shouldn't do it. But you could hit your dog. Don't do that. But it would be a correct application of positive punishment. And a very good application of that. Positive does not mean good. It just means adding something. So hitting your dog would be positive punishment. Negative reinforcement is the weirdest quadrant here. Negative reinforcement is removing something to reward behavior. So that's if I can't really think of a good example for a dog, but for a class, I could think of a few. Negative reinforcement. What can I take away from a class to reward the class? If the class was really listening during a lecture and I said, you know what, let's not have the quiz we were planning to have. You guys know it. That would be removing the quiz, and it would make the good behavior probably happen more often. It's basically removing something that you don't want. Removing to reward. If you remove to punish, that would work pretty good in class too. If I take away iPad when you're playing games on your iPad. So that would be negative punishment. So that's kind of how that works. And it gets quite a bit deeper. And this is at the most basic level, operant conditioning. You can also see on the handout, which is on the website and classroom, you can see classical conditioning and operant conditioning explained here as well. And some of the stuff we'll do next time. Basically, the whole unit is explained and spelled out on this handout. I have one worksheet for the operant conditioning types. The next thing we do is learn about operant conditioning schedules. Today we learned how you reinforce, whether it's positive, negative reinforcement, or punishment. And then after that, we learned about when you can reinforce, which is like you can do it every time, partially, and then based on a few different things. But let's go over this. So what you're going to do for this worksheet is, I guess, pop it into Notability or however you can write on this. But you will write one letter for the first blank and another letter for the second blank. Your options for the first blank are either P or N for positive or negative. The second blank, it is either R or P for reinforcement or punishment. So it can be PR, PP, NR, or NP. If you ask yourself two very distinct questions, it's pretty easy to do this whole thing. And the questions are, is something being added or taken away? That's the first question. So let's look at number one. And if it's being added, it's positive. If it's being taken away, it's negative. A woman watching a football game offers her child candy to play quietly. Is something being given to the child or taken away from the child? It's something being given. So the first letter here would be P. I can't write on this with the software I'm using, so I'm just going to leave it blank. But P goes in the first blank. Second blank is either reinforcement or punishment. And so you ask yourself, as a result of being, in this case, given the candy, is that going to make child play quietly more often in the future or less often in the future? And it's probably going to increase the play quietly behavior. So that would be positive reinforcement. Number two, at a party, you become angry. That's an important word. You become angry when your significant other flirts with another person. Is something being added or taken away? Which means positive or negative. And in this case, because it said become angry, you are adding the anger. So that would be P for positive. The second question is that going to make significant other flirt with another person more often or less often? At least, which one do you want to have happen? And that would be P, punishment, because you are punishing your significant other for that behavior. So that'd be positive punishment. Let's skip three. I'm going to skip around a little bit because some of these are a little weirder. Number four, and just kind of one caveat that you just kind of have to remember is that any kind of timeout is always negative because you're taking away freedom. You can kind of see it either way, but just remember any timeout is always negative. So child put in the chair facing the corner for misbehaving is negative because you're taking away freedom. And is that going to make the child misbehave more often or less often? And that would be less often, so punishment. So that would be negative punishment. Let's go to number 8 because it's kind of confusing. And then maybe 9 and probably stop there. And the rest can be you. Number 8, a rat that is currently being shocked presses the lever to stop the shocking. Is something being added or taken away? And since the shock is being removed, that would be negative. So the first letter would be N for negative. Since we are removing the shock, negative means removing, positive means adding. The second letter, is that going to make the rat press a lever more often or less often in the future? And that will make the rat press that lever more often because he's being rewarded for pressing the lever. So that would be R, reinforcement. 15, some people get confused about. It's just the first half of the sentence is 15A. The second half is 15B. So go ahead and complete that, and then that'll be your assignment for today.